And so the story of the Hollow Village and the Golden City of the Scorching Sun has finally come to an end. I don't think we ever even saw the Golden City in this season if what Riko and Wazukian said was true, but at the end of the day, it wasn't even really about the Golden City. It wasn't about these characters reaching that destination. It was about their dreams. It was about their longing and their wish to escape to that Golden City and fulfill their desires. And in a way, I think that's an even more beautiful representation of why they titled this entire season what they did. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to the final Made in Abyss Season 2, the Golden City of the Scorching Sun episode review. Today we will be talking about episode 12, Gold, and I am very interested in seeing what the overall opinion on this season turns out to be in the long run, because obviously the initial impressions of something, that first wave of opinions right after something is over, is usually quite different from where the opinion lands much further down the line when more people get the opportunity to watch and binge it. And I think there's a lot of excellent, amazing things in this season that will have people love it for sure, but I also think there's a few not so great things that could split the opinion down in the long run. I guess all I'm saying is get ready to hear people say that Made in Abyss fell off and that season 1 was so much better. For me, I have a lot of opinions on this season overall swirling around in my mind, but that's not really what I want to discuss today. I still want to let a lot of those thoughts settle and form before jumping into any statements about the series overall. So for today, I just want to talk about this episode specifically and why I really ended up liking it a lot. It's the finale, of course, for this entire arc's story, so I would hope that I liked it, but really, genuinely, as a finale to this arc, I think this episode does pretty much everything that it needs to as a conclusion to this story. Now, I do have some nitpicks and criticisms, as always, but for the most part, I'm very satisfied with where this season ended and the way that the story concluded, and it really just all comes down to narratively, thematically, tonally, all of these loose ends and remaining plot threads being tied up in ways that we all saw coming, but at the same time just are the natural endpoints for a lot of these things. For example, Faputa's promise to her mother, that goal that was driving her all along to free her from this prison and kill her so that she can finally be free. There wasn't really any subversion with that. We knew that that was her goal very early on, and in the end, she completed that goal. She destroyed the village and she freed her mother. What I'm saying is that it didn't need a subversion because it was the most organic and natural conclusion. The story was building to this, it paid it off, and now Faputa can move on her own path. And I think there's something to be said about a writer choosing the natural conclusion for their story versus forcing some kind of subversion or twist for the sake of it. This episode was not without its twists and turns though, and one that I was mixed on at first but have slowly come to actually really appreciate and enjoy is the way that Vueko's character ended up being concluded in this episode. At first, when I saw what was going on, when I saw Vueko turning into a hollow, I was practically yelling at my screen, no, Made in Abyss, you cannot kill such an important character in such a dumb way. Because, like I mentioned in one of my previous reviews, I was half expecting Vueko to die. This is not a surprise in the slightest. That part was not unexpected. What was unexpected to me, though, was that they would do it in this way that was so unceremonious and so anticlimactic compared to how important her character was in this story. But the more that I thought about it, the more I actually really liked the messages and execution of her death. Yes, it was a very careless and very anticlimactic way to turn into a hollow, but that was kind of the point. She herself had forgotten that she was still human, and she ended up paying the price because she wasn't aware or didn't value her own existence. Thematically, I think it actually works really nicely with how her character is concluded by the end of the episode. The moment when she does realize her worth, that the Abyss, the Golden City, and Irumyuui gave her life value. It turned her to gold, contrasted to the junk that she saw herself as before. And by the end of the episode, when you finally have Faputa and Vueko meet, and the things that they say to each other, I cried, man. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't cry, because I did. I cried multiple times throughout this episode just because of how strong and satisfying these emotional conclusions were for these characters. Another really great fitting conclusion for one of the threads that's been built up this entire season was this relationship between Reg and Faputa. It's practically been one of the prominent cores of this entire storyline. Riko, Nanachi, not as much to do this arc, I'll be honest, especially Nanachi, we've talked about this. But Reg is front and center in this arc with this dynamic and relationship that he has with Faputa, and it ends up being the core that is used to end this entire season, when Reg ends up asking Faputa if she will join them on their journey, and just, I absolutely love this. Not just because Faputa is hopefully joining the group, that alone is already pretty awesome for the future of the series and the group dynamics, but what I really loved about this scene was how Reg specifically mentions that he still doesn't remember any of their past or what he promised to Faputa when he left her. And the reason why that's so important to mention in that scene, and why it caps off this episode so beautifully, is because Reg, at the end of the day, still ended up making that exact same promise to her even without his memories. Reg is just that pure and genuine as a character that even without his memories, he'll still reach out and behave exactly the same no matter what ends up happening. And I love Reg's character so goddamn much, man. Again, I mentioned this a few weeks back, but I absolutely love how consistently Akihito writes his characters. I love how strong their identities are in a way that doesn't falter no matter what's going on in the story. You can always count on these characters to behave the way that they should. Reg's purity and heart, Riko's ambition and moral ambiguity, Nanachi's pragmatism and emotional vulnerability. It's so good, and I don't think an average viewer really even notices why stuff like this is so good. They don't even recognize how important it is for these characters to be such a consistent presence and personality in the story. And honestly, you probably shouldn't notice that. In a perfect world, writing like that goes completely unnoticed because you become immersed in those characters and this story because of how real it feels. Overall, I think they did a really great job concluding this story. I think everything I just mentioned were the keys to making sure that emotionally this story ended on a strong and satisfying conclusion. But at the same time, there is a lot about this arc that is still shrouded in a lot of ambiguity and abstract storytelling that can be hard to decipher, especially when you are watching it on a weekly schedule. Some of that information can naturally go out of your head as you get through this series. It can be difficult to retain all of these complicated story beats and weird concepts that end up being critical to understanding certain characters or certain plot points. And maybe the biggest one I can think of in this episode and just in this season overall was Wazukyan. Great character, great antagonist that I ended up really liking a lot. And yet, despite my predictions and hopes for what the story would end up doing with his character, he kind of just got off screen. We literally catch up to him and he's already dying. I can't say that I wasn't disappointed by that, but at the same time, I do get it. I get that ticking clock aspect of the story and all of these hollows fading away. But my real issue, or maybe not even an issue, but just my confusion with Wazukyan, is wondering what his plan and what his goal was in the first place. Nanachi even asks him essentially this question about what his endgame was with all of this and what was the purpose of his plan. And I'll get into what he talked about in a bit because I do think it's very interesting and thematically awesome to the story, but as far as on a literal level, what he was trying to accomplish here, it's wrapped in a lot of vague storytelling that can be hard to decipher, so I wanted to give my interpretation here on what he was doing, why he did it, and the overall events that happened. To me, the goal behind all of this was that he wanted Riko to use the wish to let all of them escape the village with their hollow bodies so that they could go further into the abyss. I don't even know if Wazukyan wanted to go to the Golden City itself. I think he probably just wanted to keep going further and further to satisfy that desire. And in the end, after gambling that Reg would defeat Faputa, which he didn't, his last option was to draw all of those beasts into the village and have them stop her instead. Ultimately, I don't know if he was expecting to still make it out alive, if he still thought that he could somehow convince Riko to somehow use the wish-granting egg to let them leave. I don't know about any of that, but that is my interpretation for how everything turned out. Maybe it's wrong, but maybe it's right. What I found more interesting and kind of beautiful about this scene with Wazukyan, though, was his answer to Nanachi's question about his end goal. Because again, it's not really an answer per se, but more of a conveyance of the themes of the story and the characters. And he mentions how surpassing your limits, becoming more than just a human to challenge the abyss, it's all about accumulation and experience. It's about not just generational knowledge and inheritance, but even just being in the right time at the right place and finding something that you wouldn't have otherwise. Riko even says that the star compass that she lost will hopefully lead another person on their own adventure that they end up enjoying as well. Basically, it all ties back into this idea of everything in the abyss being connected and everything fueling the dreams and ambitions of those who enter it. At the end of all this, Riko has practically inherited Wazukyan's ambitions of going further, just like Nanachi inherited Bondrewd's ambitions of going further. This even ties all the way back to one of the first season episodes where Riko talks about how the food that they are eating, food that may have even eaten cave raiders themselves, becomes their strength and allows them to continue forward on their journey. Just really strong messages and themes that are consistently paid off in the series about the culmination of growth and accumulation. And I think you're going to start seeing the payoffs to that stuff the closer we get to the genuine bottom of this abyss. Speaking of that bottom, though, Wazukyan says one last interesting thing before he ends up disappearing into nothingness. He talks about the homesickness that they will feel by the time they reach the bottom of the abyss, and that something even more frightening than their ambitions and dreams being unfulfilled lies at the bottom beyond the gold. Now, Wazukyan can see the future, so we know what he's talking about is legit, at least to a certain extent. But it does make you wonder what this kind of foreshadowing could mean. What could be at the bottom of the abyss that at the end of this entire journey makes Riko, of all people, again, I mentioned that consistency of her character, you cannot imagine Riko, of all people, feeling homesick or feeling like it wasn't worth the cost of reaching the bottom of the abyss. What is down here that would make even a character like her feel that way? A sacrifice of Reg? A sacrifice of the city of Orth? Lots of really interesting directions that they could take that plot point and what it means for the end of the series. If I had any notable criticism that I could bring up about this episode, I don't want to dwell on it too much since I did for the most part really love this final episode a lot, but if there was one thing with it that I think took me out of the story a bit and would probably make me say that I like season 1's finale more than season 2's, it would be the pacing and the structure. Now, I fully understand that you guys are probably really tired of hearing me say that by now, but I want to make it clear it's not a huge issue with this week's episode, because I do think that everything in this episode was still feeding into each other in a way that connected a lot of the things that are happening in a satisfying way. However, a lot of things are still happening in this episode. A lot of different perspectives are being jumped around, a lot of plot points are finally getting concluded, and it doesn't always necessarily organically fit together the way that I think it could. That doesn't mean that I think it was rushed or unsatisfyingly executed on. On the contrary, I think some of the exposition scenes are actually a little bit slow for how urgent these situations should be at this part of the story. But I guess if I had to sum up my criticism, it would just be that I think you could tie together the things that are happening in this episode in a more natural way if you had better direction and maybe a more streamlined script to work with. In general, though, a really great finale, man. A great ending to this story, and one that definitely satisfied me in all of the ways that I was hoping it would, seeing all of these plot threads getting built up over the season. And just special shout out to Kevin Penkin once again for delivering easily the best music and implementations of that music that we have seen all season. It is no exaggeration to say that a lot of my tears this episode were heavily influenced by your incredible music. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, this is not the place that I want to do a full contextual overview of my thoughts and feelings on the season as a whole. I really think I need to let it settle a bit longer before I can gather my thoughts on it. Hell, I still want to gather my thoughts on this episode by itself, but I will say that there is a more than likely chance that I will do a full series review for season 2 that I will upload on the main channel when the time is right. In the meantime, though, something I will be doing in regards to Made in Abyss Season 2 is I will be doing a group discussion on the entire season with 2 other channels, Fumincho and Mickle Pickle. Both of them have been doing their own Made in Abyss reviews this entire season. I highly recommend checking out both of their videos on the series if you haven't already. They both make really good stuff and both articulate their opinions really nicely. And yeah, I'll be joining both of them for a fun discussion of the series, and that will be uploaded to Fumincho's YouTube channel, which I will link in the description below. So look out for that. That will probably be done in the next week. Finally, I will say that I currently don't have plans to review the Made in Abyss manga now that season 2 is over. I know that might be pretty disappointing for the people who have been waiting, but watching this season honestly made me realize how much more I enjoy this series and how much more I get out of this story when I can experience it on a regular basis. And the release schedule for Made in Abyss, while it has gotten better recently, I just don't expect that to last long after the anime is finished, and even if it did, it's just still too slow in my opinion for me to want to experience that story in that way, especially now that it does seem like we are entering the last few arcs. What I will be continuing to do on this channel, though, are the weekly episode reviews of anime. I have a lot of fun doing these, and it's really just the challenge of finding something that I actually want to cover and discuss in that way on a weekly basis. And luckily, in the very next season, 2 weeks from now in fact, there is another series that I have had the desire to cover for a pretty long time. That's right, Chainsaw Man, baby. I will be here every week reviewing Chainsaw Man and talking about it with you guys. I know practically nothing about the series other than some panels and some characters that are pretty hard to avoid if you spend any time in anime circles. So other than that, I'm blind, and I'm very excited to watch that and see what the deal is with this series that everyone's hyped about. Look forward to that. Let me know in the comments or join the Discord server in the description below to talk about this week's episode or the series of Made in Abyss as a whole, or anything really. It's a great community of people. We have a lot of fun there every single day, and I look forward to talking with all of you either there or on the future reviews. Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure. I love you, and I will see you in the next video.